Coming to you from Long Island Sound, where the hippest music can be found, like a buried treasure underground. Clam radio, on the ocean floor and having fun, spinning tunes since 1961, getting absolutely nothing done. Clam radio, airwaves, sound waves, from under the real waves. Clam radio.
You know, you stupid fools, this is Rocky the Coco of the Fast Science Theater, and for some reason or another, you've misdialed, and you're listening to WUSB 90.1 FM Stony Brook, and we all know what the Stony comes from.
Airwaves, sound waves, from under the real waves. Clam radio, Clam radio, Clam radio.
Can you dig it?
A long, long time ago, this'll be the day that I die.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Na, 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 na. I've been trying hard to make it, but I've waited far too long. Never know how far to take it. Always end up on the lawn, talking about who even a shadow knows his name. Time will take you places that you've never been before. To fake it, no, I guess temptation was too strong. You bend your life but never break it. Oh, I guess I'll ask the girls to sing this song. Oh, even a shadow knows his name. Time will take you places that you've never been. Oh, even a shadow knows his name. Baby, baby, time will take you where you've never been before. And every now and then, before you waken, voice will come and speak to you. Oh, tell you though you feel you've been forsaken, time is never good for you, unless you know just what to do. Yeah, 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 yeah. I've been trying hard to make it. Maybe I should change my plan. What's the rule if you can't break it? Hey, I guess it's time for me to take a stand. Even a shadow knows his name. Ooh, time will take you places that you've never been before. Yeah, 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 yeah. Even a shadow knows his name. Ooh, time will take you places, baby, that you've never been. Time will always take you places. Time will always show you faces. Time will always take you places that you've never been. Time will always take you places. Time will always show you faces. Time will always take you places, baby, that you've never been before. Yeah, yeah. Radiation cripples a nation, a nation, a nation. Fuel rods broken, leaking, smoking, melting
Have a nice day.
All right, here on WUSB, 90.1 FM Stony Brook, a romance with radiation from the audio artifacts for the Dubious Cloud CD. And before that, we heard, of course, from Brian Rivera, Time Will Tell from Tragedy at Hand. We started the whole thing off with Microwave Pie. That was Don McLean's classic 7-minute piece that my guest never wants to hear again, nor does Susan DeVita. So I played the little microwave version of it, of American Pie. Bob Ball, and Bob is with me today. He's a computer scientist and a real polymath. He's done a lot of things, can do a lot of things, and he's got a lot of opinions. And hello, Bob, how are you?
Hey, John.
All right. Yeah, what is that with American Pie? Like, you have no reason to hear that ever again, probably, right?
I as you know, I'm probably one of the most eclectic people you know.
There you go. So I just know that, I know he's like, I don't ever need to hear that song again. And I know Susan's the same way. You guys have very strong feelings about that song. So I thought that was interesting. We just cut it right in half, right there. long, long time ago. Next. Thought it was funny.
Well, two things. Number one, I wanted to put a yell out to my sons.
Hey.
And one of them is, of course, serving in the United States Navy as a pilot on the USS Dewey. And the other one is down at University of South Carolina. And that's to all of our servicemen and women, protect yourselves. And then I want to give a shout back to my partner here, John, which is 20 years ago today, we created and perfected the beginnings of SA3 technology.
Yes, SA3 technology. You want to tell them a little bit about what? Does anybody care? You know, let's, and with today's sound,
today's fidelity, yeah,
really.
Basically, it was a different way to convert analog to digital and back again, and so that you had a more accurate representation of music or sound, as it were.
Right.
So, yep.
There you
and
go.
John was the co-creator of that, folks. Okay. You don't think he has mad math skills, but if you've ever listened to his music, you'd realize he actually does.
Well, we still use it for the MP3s that we make, which is still the smallest and the best in the world, and no one's ever argued that fact with me, so I thought that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, Sony just wanted to shelve it.
Yeah, they just wanted to shelve it.
Please just let's buy it from you and not use it.
Yeah, really, exactly. So what do you think about the new acquisition by Apple to buy Beats headphones? Like, who cares? Like,
it actually makes sense for Tim Cook's brain.
Yeah.
Tim Cook is part of the reason why Steve left Apple to begin with, and then they were in such bad shape. Of course, he had to come back, and they gave him 53% of the company and bailed them out. But bean counting never works, folks. Once you start counting the beans, you're in the wrong profession. You have to vision and make a vision of something, and then go on forth, and then mass production will, bring the costs, and demand will bring the costs into alignment. That's something that the primer that Steve not only realized, but other people, John F. Kennedy realized. I mean, all the big visionaries, Gene Roddenberry. People understood that, if you have a vision and you do it, people will come, and there it is. They looked at money as a means, but not an end, and that's very important.
Now, do you think that Apple, are they going to be doing any more innovative things? I mean, they've completely changed the planet on some level in terms of computers. Do you see that happening, or is it going to be some other force that's going to?
Yeah, they're into the built-in obsolescence mentality now. For example, if you have a machine that's basically 5 years or 4 years even and older, they consider it, as far as they're concerned, null and void. Go out and buy a new one. And yet they preach to everybody, well, green, we have to be green. Well, that machine, took X amount of energy to make, and thus green is actually letting it run the longest. If it runs for 15 years, it's actually, greener, okay, because of the amount of energy that went into physically creating it. So but they're only concerned about is money, and it's unfortunate, but it's it's the way it is. I mean, we right now don't seem to have leaders, in any sense that have vision. It's quite amazing that we have more money going towards Star Wars, and more interest in Star Wars and the new Star Trek movie, and than is in our own manned space program.
Yeah, a lot of money going to movies, hundreds of millions and millions of dollars. Which
or video games. I mean, a $30 billion industry. I mean, don't forget that.
Yeah,
but I mean,
that's true.
I'm not putting the diss on those things, but I'd much rather see things invested in reality, and instead of the imaginary, which. Interesting enough, in the first Star Trek episode, actually, they basically talked about that. Gene Roddenberry specifically talked about a society of people who basically focused on that instead of reality and real things, and they found it to be almost a kind of narcotic, a trap.
Right.
So, yeah.
So what do you see as the next wave for computers, though? I mean, they're going to get the quantum thing going or photon. What's going to be the next major breakthrough? What do you think? I mean, we're not going to just stay in this position, are we?
The problem is that any private undertaking is just too expensive. If you want to build the way they're going about trying to build a quantum system, it's not going to work. There's coherence problems with that. You can't build a quantum computer the way they're designing it. This gets back into, okay. Well, we know about time, okay? John's like, time will tell. I asked John to play, this time will tell thing, and okay. So in order for you to understand what's really involved with computers, you have to understand a certain amount of things of what the real limitations is, and it's all about time. And everybody talks about speed. Well, basically in 1987 we reached really the limitations of essentially the electron semiconductor circuit with a technology that IBM developed, which is called quantum tunneling.
Right.
And the circuit they found could only be so big, about approximately 30 atoms wide, and that's it. I mean, other than that, you really can't predict where the heck the electron's going to go, because things just get too small, and you get into all these different types of problems. The other problem and limitation of electrons is that other things interfere with them, and in addition to that, they're either there or they're not. So there's only, basically two states, 0 or 1. A guy by the name of Dr. Wang developed a photon computer. It was a primitive, circuit system, but it did prove that photons were the way to go. And with photons, you have not only, whether the light's there or not, but you can also have different color light. I mean, you can have
different
red
shades,
light or blue light or, chartreuse. I mean, it could be, but there's limitations with that system. So, like everything else involved, in order to perfect the next thing, you really need the necessity. And interesting enough, Kennedy basically spoke about that in his famous Moon speech. But it basically boils down, necessity is the mother of invention. So he understood the primer, and the primer was, for every pound that you had to take to the moon, you needed 10,000 pounds of fuel to do it. So you wouldn't have had the invention of the kinds of semiconductors and multi-layer circuit boards, which I was involved with, and the CAD-CAM systems, which to drill these boards to 1,000th of an inch, and the types of composites that they had to develop, all because of that necessity. And they required a cooperation of many different people, many different ideas, a lot of arguments, but that's where innovation comes from.
Right.
So today we really don't have that, and thus, if you really look at the computer technology, yes, what's improved is really the software, which is essentially a cheat. I mean, people don't really understand how these things work, but from your smartphone to the computer, they're really, really just fancy adding machines that just do, essentially trillions of calculations a second, but really they're all just simple additions and subtractions.
Right.
And from that cheating that we do in the software, we get these things to do things that seem very miraculous. But again, it's all a matter of time, right? Because it's kind of like I'm sitting here and you're sitting there, but if I had a year for every second that you're sitting there, it would seem like I'm a god. I could make things just appear out of nowhere in front of you, and essentially that's what our computers do. They do these calculations, very simple ones, but they do so many of them that it seems like they're doing very complex things when they're really not.
Right.
So
what is the next wave, though? Like 3D computing? I mean, what? We've
already done it. They've stacked cores. They've done parallel processing. Again, it's a catch. I mean, there's limitations. You have circuits that work, in nanoseconds, and multiple nanoseconds, which are essentially billions of a second. But to get into a nanosecond, by the way, if you want to know what a nanosecond is, people say this: you just take your fingers and you hold your thumb and your index finger out, and you make an L, okay? And once you make that L, just look at the distance between the tip of your index finger and the tip of your thumb, and that's essentially a nanosecond. That's how far an electron travels in 1 nanosecond. Now, circuits that are what's known as called picoseconds, you have to basically take that length and pretend it's like a wire and just grind it up into a pepper mill, and those little grains that you have, those are picoseconds. So, it's a trap. The next thing you really need to do is what's known as called quantum coupling. Okay, quantum's kind of worthless unless you actually there's physics students here. We're gonna have a lot of arguments and a lot of resolutions, but if you want to learn something, this is where it's at. Okay, Einstein in 1905 basically stated that, interesting enough, that the past, the present, and the future all exist at the same time. They're all real. just as real as yesterday was and today is now. Believe it or not, tomorrow is and it already happened. Okay? John's looking at me with a face that's in puzzlement, because he's accused of the fact that his decisions have been made a long time ago. No. It doesn't take you out of the loop. You're incorporated into that loop of decision making. You still have the rights to do things, but somewhere, okay, that decision is outmost. Okay, now, there's a proof of this. Okay, they've tried to prove, and they've done it. They flew jets with atomic clocks, and they did atomic clocks on the top of mountains, and so you have, gravity delineation, and you have, kinetic, motion dilution of time, and all kinds of things to test this out. And guess what? He was right. Okay, but he was right at 1905. So you have to remember something. 90% of the people, like just even in America, didn't have electricity back in 1905. There were no planes back in 1905. Really, most people didn't have phones back in 1905. There was no radio back in 1905. I mean, so you're not exactly going to say to them, by the way, tomorrow already exists. I mean,
right. That's an abstract.
However,
notion.
Because of the fact that these clocks essentially traveled into the future versus the other clock was in the past, okay? I'll put it another way. Let's just say that the Big Bang is essentially the beginning of time, but let's look at time-space in 4 dimensions. So, and if we look at the whole thing, we could say it's a big loaf. You could call it a loaf of meat, you could call it a loaf of bread, but let's just say it's a big loaf that exists.
Yes.
A meatloaf, yes. So, like my Aunt Addie's meatloaf. All right. Now, John's got a friend, and his friend is on the planet Gomex, okay, and his name is Oscar. And his planet's a really nice planet, and it's very unique to us because relative to us in the universe, it's not moving. It's exactly going the same exact speed as us. Everything is joined in, and but the thing is that, Gomex is 10 billion light years from us, okay? And so this guy is sitting, and he's listening to Time Will Tell because he just got his bootleg copy from his local alien bootlegger. And Oscar's listening to Time Will Tell. He's like, wow, this is some pretty neat stuff. And for him, it's current. Took him 20 years to get it, but, what's time?
What's time, exactly.
Okay, so he turns around, and he's listening to this on his, crystal player, and he gets on his Luke Skywalker speeder, and he takes off going away from John, who's sitting here at the studio at 10 kilometers per hour. Seems very simple, right? Well, not really. The now that they both had when he wasn't moving was now, but now his now is not now. Now, because he's moving away from us at 10 kilometers per hour, his now is actually 200 years in the past when Beethoven was just finishing his Fifth Symphony. Now you're saying, okay, so that's kind of neat. Well, let's just say that instead of going away from us, let's just say that now he turned around. Instead, he came towards us at 10 kilometers per hour. Well, a very interesting thing happens because we're taking slices of space-time, and the slice moves at an angle. Now it's a very small angle because he's only moving 10, but that angle again translates into 200 years in the future. So that now that he's seeing is the future now, which has to exist. See, that's the thing. So that's the reality. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that the next computer system that you really want to build, okay, is a system that combines both photon and quantum state in what's known as called teleportation entanglement. Now, how that works and why they haven't been able to do it is because you need a certain set of photons. That's right, guys. Special photons. And I'm going to call them Nobel photons.
Right, not those dime store phony ones you get.
Okay.
Right.
Now, these photons are very unique, and the reason why they're unique is because there's only a finite number of them in the entire universe. Okay, and the reality is that because of that, they can't be created in any natural way. Okay, they can only be created this way. Now, that's very important. Okay, because if you want to set up a box, and let's say we build this box, and we want to talk to this other box, this other node of the computer, we want to make sure that, say we have photon A, B, C, D, and E, that those photons are our photons and nobody else is using them because it'll screw everything up. All right. But interesting enough, as soon as you build that one box, that box is now connected and entangled to whatever the other box is, which is every single node from now into every single slice of now into the future, to the end. So that's what's so compelling about it. And because that now actually does exist, it means that you can essentially, you have a computer that's not limited in space and time. So you could literally find out what's going on in the future. Now you're going to say, oh, that's a paradox, Buck. Go ahead, say it.
It's a paradox,
It's
Bob.
a paradox, but it's not a paradox. It's incorporated, okay? This is how we get around that. Because what ends up happening is that anything that I glean from my future self, even, or from the future, is incorporated in my knowledge. I can't get rid of it. I just saw it.
Right.
It's incorporated into the future. So it's not a paradox. It actually happens one time. So it's incorporated into it. So all these nice little, Doctor Who things and changes. No, sorry, folks. It doesn't work that way. So it's not so much that you can go back in time from the future, but what you can do is you can influence the future by doing the past, but what your influence is incorporated into the future already, so you're seeing the outcome of that influence. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Now, how does that work in terms of like a multiverse, though? If there's such a thing, then.
Well,
what you're saying that there probably wouldn't be.
Again, see, let's look at the experiments. We've done these spooky actions. I mean, the Chinese just did an experiment where they claimed that it's 15,000 times faster than the speed of light. Okay, but that's assuming that their up-down detectors were really accurate. I don't know. I mean, it's still very fast. Okay, but the point is that you have to take into consideration of this. The math, the quantum guys here is going to go absolutely nuts. All right, well, everybody would say Schrodinger's cat experiment, that the cat, is alive or dead, but you don't know until you whatever. But you see, if you talk about Oscar knows that the cat's dead. So even though we don't know what the state of it is because we haven't observed it, guess what? The cat's already dead, okay? That's the thing that people don't want to understand, is that the stuff's already happened. It has to already exist. So the reality is that even though you have these math problems, which, and wave formulas work out to multiverses, those same formulas, by the way, guys, they also can indicate that there is no universe. It's zero. So I tend to dismiss anything that shows me that everything doesn't exist, because it does. So I think we just need the next math. We need our next Newton to come along and give us our next math, because obviously, we're wrong, because I'm here, you're here. Granted, we're 99.997% of nothing, but we're still loaded with lots of information, as you could tell by the way I talk. Lots of gamming. At any rate, that's basically that. Did I lose you there with that little slice of Oscar and stuff?
It does rack my mind a little bit. Yes, it's interesting. I got to really rethink some of the stuff you're saying. My guest is Bob Ball, he's a computer scientist and a polymath kind of guy, and we're discussing all kinds of stuff here on Clam Radio, 90.1 FM, Stony Brook, just in case you were wondering. Now, what do you think about some of the stuff that they're doing at CERN? Do you think they're going to be, they said they found the boson particle and stuff, or at least they said they think they found it, Higgs boson. I mean, do you think they're going in a good direction, or what? I mean, is it dangerous what they're doing?
They're getting a lot of money. You see, the problem, it goes back to, climate change and global warming and everything else.
Right.
You have to look at what's funded. So, for example, if you want to do something on global warming and take the establishment tail on it, oh, great, you're going to get that grant. But if you turn around and say, well, let's see, okay, the CO2 is at 400 parts per million. What does that really, really mean? Well, it's not really a lot. What's the real greenhouse gas in the atmosphere? Oh, gee, in the troposphere, 92% of it is water vapor. Well, does CO2 really make a difference? Well, Al Gore was right, he showed you that graph with the CO2 going through the roof like that. It has gone through the roof, but guess what? Over the past 15 years, the actual mean temperature of the planet's actually gone down, not up. And also, by the way, those measurements don't take into account, the volcanic activity that's occurring underneath the South Pole and the Greenland volcanic activity that's going on. I mean, they get 90% of their energy from geothermal activity. I mean, so is anybody putting a meter on that amount of, watts that's coming into the environment? No. Their CO2 detectors that they have are right outside of, basically off of Hawaii, and you have that volcano out there, and that puts out more CO2 in 1 month than we do, all of humankind does in a year. But the other thing that's interesting is that, our CO2 emissions are actually at 1992 levels, and, what about China and India? I mean, they're putting a new plant online every single week, and they're putting out billions and billions of... I mean, China is now almost 150% of what we put out. I mean, as far as CO2, but we're not even talking about all the other pollution they put out. I mean, they dump copper sulfate directly into their rivers. I mean, they literally have rivers that are on fire and yellow and green. And do you really want industry to continue to go into that country versus here, where we have OSHA and we have standards, and our coal plants are actually very productive? I mean, the true green technology, real green technology, is fusion. I mean,
Yeah, so it wouldn't be like fracking or any of that kind of stuff. That's kind of like going into
fusion. Right now, okay. For every 10 kilowatts of electricity that you use in your house to run stuff, and then the average home uses approximately 15 to 20 kilowatts a day, depending on the weather and air conditioning, everything else. For every 10 kilowatts of electricity, it's basically costing you essentially about $6. All right. If you had fusion, it would cost you less than 6 cents. And it doesn't seem like a big difference, but it's a huge difference.
That's a big difference, sure.
Okay. In some places of the country and the world, that cost is almost $60. You have people who are cooking with open fires, breathing all kinds of carbon monoxides and whatnot, and doing whatever because they're in the third world. Okay, so fusion is not only for us here, it's for everybody. This is what Kennedy understood, JFK's vision. He knew that the technology was going to change, mankind in very drastic ways, I mean, when Queen Isabella hocked the crown jewels to allow Columbus to discover the new world, I mean, he didn't say that because he was, fine of Queen Isabella. He understood the primer, that technology is the basis of it. And there it is. I mean, so if we get fusion, all bets are off for a lot of things. You won't have to worry about oil because oil, I mean, it's just too expensive. Nobody would even think about it. I mean, it's all about cost. And then you wouldn't have China polluting because manufacturing would come back here because the energy is a big thing. The reason why they're able to produce things so cheaply is because they don't care about the pollution. They don't have any bees. They have to send their people out to pollinate stuff. I mean, they've been using DDT for the past 50 years. I mean, their whole genocide on their own population worked really well. I mean, their mitochondrial DNA population is like 1 out of every 30 people. It's insane. I mean, it's really, really crazy. But
so how close are we to having the cold fusion? I mean, does it exist right now?
Pons and Fleischmann actually, yeah. I mean, there's Lem. I mean, Pons and Fleischmann, believe it or not, this is what happens when you have politics that governs grants, because they were actually right. I mean, they were really bona fide, really good scientists that did really, really good work, and their stuff was really, really true. But you had people, Department of Energy and people at MIT, and they just built a $2.5 billion Tokamak, and we got this grant. So it was money that, corrupted all these guys with their nice little sweaters, and they wanted all their grants. And here's these two chemists that did something on a kitchen table for, I don't know, $1,500. I don't want to hear that. So, I mean, yeah, there's focused fusion, which I think is the most promising, which is a combination of barium, boron, and deuterium, and that's basically using basically a huge pulse discharge that collapses on itself, causes a fusion reaction. There's a polywells. I mean, you got kids going to Home Depot and buying PVC and magnetic wire and going on to eBay and getting chambers from electron microscopes and building their own polywelds in their basement and their own fusion. The kid won the Siemens Prize by building a polyweld fusion reactor, and he did it with a homemade neon transformer and some PVC and other types of stuff. Pretty radical stuff, because those are like really big X-ray producers, folks. Anytime you move a lot of electrons, you produce X-rays. Not a real healthy thing to be around.
Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, there's fusion is the way, and we have it. I mean,
now you're talking something that's pretty small to run your house for like a year or whatever, right? You're talking about
look, we actually have we did spend the money on a fusion reactor. It's sitting right over there at MIT. I mean, it works. The problem is it runs on helium-3, and there's no natural source of helium-3, but there actually is. It's sitting on the moon. It turns out there's 2.2 million metric tons of helium-3 sitting there, saying, here it is. The guy says, like, by the way, here it is, and by the way, I left you a Lake Erie on the bottom of the South Pole, so here it is. I mean, it's kind of like 2001, folks. I mean, 100 pounds of this stuff would power all of our electrical needs in the entire continental United States for a year and put out zero pollution. Do the people in power want that? Well,
of course not.
85% of all the governments of the world, earn like 90% of their income from taxes on energy. And so then you have to say to yourself, do they, it's kind of like the SIGWA we were talking about JP Morgan and Tesla.
Right.
And Tesla was talking about free. It wasn't really free, folks, okay? He was trying to harness basically the electromagnetic, solar wind and the induction that comes from that. So it's technically not really free. It's not like he was getting it from nothing. He was getting it from something that's real. And, he basically invented a lot of the stuff that we use today, including this transmission is done on his monopole antenna. I mean, essentially, he invented
Nikola Tesla's.
I mean, as a matter of fact, folks, if you didn't know this, okay, the patents that Marconi made were ripoffs of Tesla, and they reverted back in 1995. They actually said that, oh, by the way, Tesla really did it.
Yeah, he came up with a lot of that stuff.
So,
what do you think leads somebody to come up with that? You think he just, did he see the future, or he just
divine inspiration? I mean, certainly, I felt that sometimes. I mean, like, remember, all of a sudden it'd be a whole bunch of stuff in front of me, like, it would take me a month to figure it out, There's just times when, things just click. I mean, some of your music, I would say the same thing, it's absolute genius.
Would you be hearing it from the future, though? Like, maybe getting that information from the future?
Well,
Is that possible?
It's possible that deja vu is a form of entanglement in your brain. I mean, it's because again, your mind exchanges photons all the time. Essentially, your mind is basically a huge quantum computer, folks. Okay, and it's first generation analog, so there's you have infinities all over the place. So you basically, your brain works with extremely complex numbers, but then puts out and computes and puts out a real number. So it's, for you quantum physicists out there in the school, you see this when you do all your work, and you're on your your fifth mocha latte.
Yes. Now, I know that you've been putting some stuff out on Facebook a lot about Fukushima. So that's a big problem, and nobody's really addressing it on the media. Is there any hope for us? I mean, what are they going to do?
Michio Kaku was, and then, of course,
I don't see much of him anymore.
They just kind of banned him from anything that would let him talk about it.
I know. I've noticed that, and also that guy Tyson, too. Yeah. I noticed all of a sudden they don't want to have him on.
Well, because they essentially, they have three China syndromes. I mean, they have three meltdown cores that are still melting and are still running. And essentially, they kind of have the right idea, but not enough to do. We need a real, look, folks. I mean, I hate to be political here, but you need a leader, a president. Okay, the president of the free world is the president because he has to be the president. And what ends up happening is this is where you need to step up and be president. And the reality is we're the only ones, and really cooperation with Putin, Russia, really the whole United Nations. But you need somebody to stand up, the United States to stand up and say, look, we got to go out there with two, aircraft carriers and these reactors and produce, liquid nitrogen from hell, and we got to freeze 1 square mile, okay, around the plant. That's right. You heard me. Freeze it down to, guess what, about 800 meters, okay? I know. Right? I know. Oh, you guys out there doing the thermal calculations for this. Yeah, I know. Okay? So you might need a few submarines, too. Basically, you need a lot of energy to do this, and we're like the only people who can do it with the Russians. And then you need boron from hell, so we have to go to them for that, because you'd probably need like every amount of boron possible and a lot of cement. I mean, what you need to do is freeze the whole area so that these cores can then continue to burn into the center of the earth, okay? And that's what you need to do, because right now they're in the groundwater table and they're spewing out unmeasurable amounts of radiation. Okay, and when I mean unmeasurable, folks, I mean they can't. They're breaking everything. Everything they're trying to measure this stuff is broken. Okay, that's how bad it is. So so they're just dumping this water into the ocean. Yeah, you know, it's the Pacific. One guy gets on. It's a big place. It's going to be diluted. Well, not really. You know, these nanoparticles. You know, they float on the surface and. You know, the biologics eat that, and it gets biologically concentrated. You know, cesium-137 hangs around for 40 years, and people don't understand that it's not so much the exposure to it, it's the ingestion of it, because once you ingest it, it becomes part of you, and then it's irradiating your cells from the inside. It's kind of like stepping into a microwave oven. I don't recommend it. Yeah.
So, well, what they've been finding a lot of sea life has been coming up on the shore. All these dead sea animals and stuff. And
I like the Godzilla wasps. I don't know if you saw that one I posted. Okay, pictures of wasps the size of my hand.
I saw that. That's interesting.
I'm like, there it is. You know, the Japanese are. This is the reason why they're doing this, folks. See, Godzilla is such a hit. They want the real one.
Oh my God! Imagine that.
Yeah, but it doesn't work that way. Okay, no. It really doesn't. It actually activates things in our DNA that's not a really good thing to activate, and the problem is that it is in the food chain already. I mean, you had students here that actually it's been deleted and reposted and deleted and reposted. They took meters of. They had this snow mound, you know, in your parking lot. That was, I don't know, it was a good, 25, 30 feet high, and it was an accumulation of snow that we had this record mountain this winter for about a month. And they were getting 230, 200, 300, okay, off of this pile of snow standing next to it. Now, what it basically means is that if you stand there, you're getting a CAT scan every 5 minutes, okay? Now, if that's not bad enough, okay, talk about ingestion of any of that. Because there was strontium-90 in it, there was cesium, there was iodine. I mean, okay, the iodine, the half-life is only about 30, 40 days, but still, none of this stuff is good, especially for people who are pregnant or young infants or, any of that stuff. Now, most of that went into our groundwater, and people are like, oh my God, no, that's actually okay, because most of the water that people drink on Long Island comes from artesian wells, and it takes about 40 years for it to, so you're actually drinking water that's about 35 to 40 years old. So you're only drinking toluene and other kinds of solvents that they use during, the heavy industrial aviation industry that used to be on the island.
Yeah, that's great.
And the heavy agriculture industry
as if
that
the
used
chlorine
to be on the island.
Yeah.
So that's the only stuff you're drinking now is the pesticides that they put on the potato plants back then and everything else. So
that's interesting, yeah. So they're saying that radiation levels have risen, like in California, and there's been a cloud. It was over Pennsylvania when this happened, 2011. Why don't we hear? We don't hear anything about this. I mean,
I have sons.
Wouldn't the whole world want to get together?
My son went to the United States Naval Academy. He graduated. His very good friend of his roommate, okay, was in the base, was at the base. And during the earthquake, and then consequently afterwards. And the Japanese government and TEPCO lied. It lied to our government. And because of that, a lot of sailors on a lot of ships and a lot of hardware were not only contaminated, but these people were really, really, really harmed. And Michio Kaku, of course, said, hey, we're looking at what's coming out of there, and there's absolutely no way that those explosions were what they said it was. They said it was, hydrogen gas. No, folks, those explosions that you saw on TV, yeah, those were the cores going critical and blowing up. That's what happened. When you saw that and you were going, oh my F, that's exactly right. You were saying the right word. It actually should be FUBAR. Can we say FUBAR? I think we could say FUBAR. Yes, FUBAR, folks. A big FUBAR. And not a 1 FUBAR, not a 2 FUBAR, but 3 FUBARs. So not only is this like a Category 7, I would say it's a Category 7 times 3. Okay, and we know how well, now Chernobyl, you said that was bad enough, but the Soviets at least moved on that, folks. They moved right away. They moved heaven and earth. They put 300,000 guys on that thing. They have a whole bunch of equipment that's like no more. I mean, they moved because they understood what it meant, okay? These people in Japan, okay, they're beyond committing hara-kiri on themselves. They have a knife to all of our throats because we can't live without the Pacific. I mean, you're talking about contamination of the entire northern hemisphere and really the planet itself. I mean, these things that thing's putting out, there's no tolerance for it. There's no acceptable amount of radiation that you can consume. I don't care what anybody says. I mean, you want to go back and look at these Army films from 1950 before these guys went, like my like Ann's father went and literally went into this explosion. By the way, here it is. We're setting off Grable and go run that way, and there's the bomb, and go do it. Get out of your dug-in foxhole and go run towards that explosion. Yes, and we're going to take some tests. Yeah, so here's a guy died in 1995, okay, from all kinds of ailments, okay, at the age of 67. Why? Well, why is all these people who were in that test dead? Why, I mean, it's very simple. It doesn't work, okay? I mean, unless you're a cockroach, radiation, is a real problem.
Yeah, definitely. So, well, do you see hope that we're going to be able to clean this up, or I mean, what do you think the odds are that we will? The percentages are in our favor or not?
The fact that main media doesn't cover it, okay, which they don't. I as you know, if you watch my Facebook thing, and I'm on Facebook, folks, you can friend me. I post every scrap from inside information. I have a couple friends who actually live in Japan, and by the way, they send me stuff at peril, which means it's against the law for them to send me any information about radiation or anything like that in Japan. They've made it illegal, interesting enough, our administration has turned off a lot of radiation sensors, things that they were measuring before. Our military, on their ships, they detected stuff, and they essentially silenced those things because obviously on a carrier that runs on nuclear energy, you want to know if you have these types of particles around.
Right.
So they have TDL detectors that are extremely sensitive to that. Yeah, I mean, it's I worry specifically about all the Navy personnel that's essentially in the Pacific because they're getting their water from the Pacific. The thing that I do know about is that most of these nanoparticles are on the surface of the water, believe it or not. And then you have the biologic concentrators, which the tuna, the sardine, all those fish.
Right.
I mean, and remember, there's a lot of stuff that eats that. So it's very, 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 very scary. Yeah, it's not something I want to think about because no matter how many letters I write to the White House, no matter how many of other people talk, nobody is doing anything about it. And essentially, that's not really true. They lie about it. Yeah, that's basically what they're doing. I mean, they lie about it, and when something's undercovered, then they lie about it again. Well, and then when they change the numbers again, it's very. It's not very good. So, what I'm asking to do, and I think this would be a good idea, is I think that we need to tell this country, and that's both, by the way, both Republicans and Democrats. I'm a universal insulter when it comes to this. I'm a real firm believer of 2-term limits, period, for everybody, that serving in Congress, both in the Senate and the Congress, should be like jury duty. I mean, not something you really want to do, but when you're doing it, you take it very seriously.
They make a career out of it.
No, it was never intended to be a career.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, but we need to take back the country, and for that matter, the people of the world need to take back the world, and we all need to do nothing. Okay, everybody listen to my voice. We just set a time and do absolutely nothing for 30 minutes. It won't affect anything, but it will tell people who think that they're in charge of us that, they better listen because, we matter and we really want things to happen. Now, the reality is that it really would take a really beautiful thing, a multinational getting together. And it would take all the nations to really do this, to really handle this problem in Japan. It really would take a real multinational, rolling up your sleeves, I mean, hand-in-hand kind of thing. I mean, you literally have to see Obama, Putin, the Chinese leaders. I mean, everybody with their sleeves rolled up to do this, because that's what it would take to stop this. That's how bad it is.
Well, wouldn't that be good for industry, though? I mean, you'd find great minds working on things.
I think it would be good for the psyche of the planet as a whole, as a species. I think it'd be good because it could show that we could do something that wouldn't be just about money, and it would be about the survival of all of us, and it would affect all of us. And we really we need to do this. We needed to do this 3 years ago.
Yeah, it's been a while.
And the thing is that the reason why it should have been done 3 years, they were lying about it. I mean, there's still truths that are coming out, but there's truths that our government knew because we had the Reagan there, folks. So it's not like we didn't have people who understood exactly what was going on, because they, again, have detectors on that ship that tell them what kind of isotopes they were getting. There's only you had to have a critical nuclear meltdown in order to get those isotopes. It couldn't have been a hydrogen explosion, and the way TEPCO was saying it was. And so our administration, well, maybe they didn't know, because he seems to get all his information from the news. I mean, my God, I don't want to get into it. But they had to know. They had to know because, like I said, they have those sensors on those ships. They have those detectors, and they knew they were. I mean, they knew they were in Charlie, and people out there understand what that means in the military. They knew they were in that kind of condition. So I don't understand how. Well, I understand how you keep it a quote secret to some extent, but to let it go on to this extent, and then untold hundreds and hundreds of tons of the most unbelievable amounts of radioactive water. And yeah, the Pacific's a great place, but it just doesn't work the way they think it does. It just doesn't. I mean, yeah, there's beaches in San Francisco, Oregon, Washington, state of Washington. They're picking up huge levels of radioactivity. People are just going out and measuring themselves. If you post it on YouTube, they delete the videos. I mean, if you go to my favorites thing, Bull on, you go into my favorite, you'll see delete, all these deletions. Yeah, I mean, you want to know there's a conspiracy? Well, yeah, there's a conspiracy to hide the truth. They want people to go out, smoke as much pot as possible, and get drunk and be stupid, so they can continue to do what they want to do, and they think what they're doing is just so important.
Okay.
Sorry about that, folks.
My guest is Bob Ball, a computer scientist and polymath, and a man with many, many opinions here. And you are listening to WUSB 90.1 FM Stony Brook. This is Clam Radio. And let me play two pieces, and then we will we'll talk more to Bob. Got more questions to ask him. And keep in mind, Bill McNulty is here at 11 o'clock. He's in the other room. He's getting ready to go. Hopefully he's listening to this program, and it'll, maybe he'll continue it. Who knows? On that note, take a listen to these two tracks, and we'll be right back.